Okay, welcome everyone to the YouTube series on cybersecurity in digital mental health. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is probably one of the most mind-blowing topics that I've ever thought about in mental health space. So we're going to be talking about synthetic data in machine learning for mental health care. We're going to cover some methods, some risks, and some opportunities. While it might appear very computationally heavy, as the title suggests, I think that everyone should be aware of this topic. So we're going to try our best to keep it very high level, and our guests will go into the weeds, into the details, but we'll try and bring it back out so that a broader audience can stay with us. A lot of things with ethics and trust and the public sphere, policy, law, it really is all attached to what we're talking about. So I'll also be using a script for this conversation because there are a lot of sensitive things that we're going to be discussing. So I am not an expert in synthetic data. I'm also not an epistemic trespasser, so I don't even pretend to be an expert in this space. And I'm seeing this through an ethical lens. So the overarching question that we're going to be exploring today with the guest is, to what extent can synthetic data be used to protect or exploit people's privacy? And we have an academic expert with us today who works deeply in synthetic data within a mental health care context. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Julia Ive from Queen Mary, University of London. And Julia, if you could introduce yourself to our guests and a little bit of background about you.
Hello, hi. Thanks a lot, Becky. Thanks a lot for this wonderful introduction. I'm Julia Ive. I'm lecturer in natural language processing at Queen Mary, University of London. And throughout my research career, I have been working in different approaches to text generation. That was multimodal text generation, summarization. I have been also working in machine translation. And recently, since 2018, I have been working in synthetic text generation for mental health care. And this has all started with a pilot project that was funded by a research council that allowed me to study the possibilities and explore the pathways towards the generation of synthetic data for mental health care. What is also important is that after this pilot project, together with King's College London, we have organized a workshop with patients and stakeholders and policymakers to get the idea of the perception around the synthetic text generation for mental health from a broader domain of stakeholders. That will be probably a very concise summary about what I have done in this domain. I let Becky continue.
Yeah, thank you. And we will go deeper, but that was a really nice holistic overview. And again, just a reminder to our viewers that the issues that we will be discussing are very sensitive, obviously mental health, and in a space where not many people are exploring. And Julia's really kind of paving the way here with different stakeholders. So I just ask people to try not to rush to any judgments and try to understand different perspectives and angles of this topic. And so before we begin our interview or conversation, I just want to set the scene a little bit here because whether you know or not, you live in a world of synthetic data already. So whether it be from fakes to filters, fake news, body image editing filters, these kinds of fakes and filters can really disproportionately harm vulnerable people. And that's really what it's all about, ultimately trying to help protect vulnerable people. But there's this new kind of fake that's emerging that a lot of people don't know, which is fake data or synthetic data. And there's a nice quote from Richard Chen and colleagues, and it says that since the start of the pandemic, there has been an explosion of interest around the development of synthetic data in areas such as training AI algorithms, epidemiological modeling, digital contact tracing, and sharing data between hospitals. So this explosion and the contradiction of people, a lot of people not knowing what's going on, I think that's what makes this kind of conversation really important, that we can broaden that conversation. So we're going to break things down into 4 parts because I like to have structure. And the first part, from the get-go, Julia, we will ask you what on earth is synthetic data, because we've mentioned it already about 20 times, but we want to explain it on a very broad level because there's different types of things. Then we're going to move to the elephant in the room. So it's very important that we understand the risks and the bad that can be done with synthetic data or fake data. I want to make a huge distinction that that is not Julia's work. So Julia is not working on the elephant in the room, but it's very important for us just to work through the risks without interjecting the opportunities. We're just going to work through that. Then we'll move to a deeper dive of Julia's work, and we can sort of demystify how synthetic data could be used for good within a mental health context. And then we'll just end with what the future might hold and discuss other things, challenges, opportunities, the patient and public perspective, the importance of that, and how do we even regulate this kind of space. So what I'll start off with is, Julia, help us so much with what is synthetic data, what does it mean? There are face generators, there are synthetic text generators. So just on a high level, can you explain what that term is?
Thank you, Becky. Thank you. This is a very good question, and I will give my definition of synthetic data, how I see it. So this is the data that aggregates relevant information from the real data, enhance this real data without revealing individual information that could be sensitive. So this second part is especially important to emphasize, because as you might heard about, is that the models, the AI models trained with real data, they actually do have a capacity, and if they're not properly trained, to reproduce the original data, meaning real data. And that's what could result in some product of AI which could be considered fake, but actually contains some parts of real data, the one that was used for model training. And for me, this is not proper synthetic data, because it's just a mixture of real data, some compilation of real data. This is not what I call synthetic data. That's why we in our research group, we pay particular attention to the aspect of privacy preservation and the aspect of proper training of AI models that do not memorize the training data they are built with.
Okay, thank you. So I'll park that to the side, and we'll come back and visit that in part 3 when we dive into your work in detail. But for now, on a higher level, I just want to address the elephant in the room, because you touched on a couple of points there. So I just want to raise a few things from an ethics, legal perspective, and a few other perspectives, and just get your view on what the risk could be, not necessarily with your own work, but your views generally. So when it comes to synthetic data, raising issues around ethics and the law, it's the example I always go to is the fake face generator, which could come with like legal likeness issues, especially when algorithms are trained on images that are scraped from the internet. It's harder to think about words and the legal likeness when using synthetic text. But is there any other like legal or ethical things that you think about when you're doing your work? And is there any support that you can get in order to actually do your work very safely? Or are you literally at the forefront and you're trying to create this, the ethics and inform the law, I suppose? So I'll just stop there and ask that question. Then I've got another ethics one.
Right, thank you, Becky. Yes, that's a very good question. I think that there is a lot of already work that has been done in this domain. In terms of, in general, usage of language generation models. And there has been a lot of work done in our domain with respect to reducing the bias of the text generators. And not and protecting the text generation against reproducing what was in the real data that the models were trained on. I think that there is a lot to do, of course, from our side still, especially in the domain of mental health, because this is the highly sensitive data. What I would rather say, this is there is no more distinction in mental health data between some private information, singular information like names or phone numbers, for example, and some other elements that are neutral. There is no longer this distinction. I think mental health text is by definition on its whole very private. And this is something that we are to address, that we are working on, that we need to establish a certain ethical and legal framework for. But there is a large basis of work that has been done already in terms of general models. And we are funding our work on this established baseline already. And what is also very important is that, especially in the recent couple of years, there has been a lot of work in our AI community about establishing the ethics of the research work. There are now norms of creating models with a responsible view of things. There are models of reporting results and building things with anticipation of what can happen further. And this is very important because we are at the forefront, as Becky, you said, at the forefront of research. And there are things that we need to anticipate because this is what to see what can actually happen and foresee what can result from our research, even if there are already a lot of things that are investigated and known.
Okay, great. Thank you. That really helped set the scene as to where we are currently. I've got one more ethics question, and then we're going to switch over to security and privacy to see risks from that perspective. But when it comes to patient and public involvement, PPI, you mentioned that you were reaching out to PPI groups, which I think is absolutely fantastic and completely needed. And I'm borrowing language from Chen's paper, Richard Chen et al., that it could be perceived as manufacturing pseudo realities or creating spurious imitations, or in my own words, putting words in people's mouths. It could be perceived that way. So especially when it comes to mental health, with the ground truth being so important, Chen et al. Again says, what is real, what constitutes authenticity, and how would the lack of authenticity shape our perception of reality? So again, just thinking about the ethical issues in the frameworks, I'm very pleased that you're starting to think about those perspectives. And if you'd like to comment further, you can, otherwise I can move to security, but I'll pause.
Yes, Becky, that was an excellent point. And I think it exactly touches the point that I have made earlier, is that we need a lot to think a lot how the models that we build will be used, and how to legally establish a framework that will protect the and restrict the usage to good purposes. As everything in AI is, as every powerful tool that humanity has, this tool could be used for good purposes and for malicious purposes as well. And it's our responsibility to take care of that, to anticipate malicious usage, and try to regulate and make sure that this usage does not happen. So I think it's very important. I do not say that the models we build cannot be used for malicious purpose. Yes, they can, but it's our responsibility to make sure this doesn't happen. And also what is very important is that the amount of good and amount of bad that can come out of AI is unknown. I think still that the amount of good is more than the amount of bad, and we just need to regulate what the bad situations that can arise from the usage of AI.
I thank you. That was really important. And so on that note, we're sort of talking about malicious acts, and an example comes to mind with fake impersonation videos like deep fakes, how they can propagate misinformation and fool facial recognition software. You could start to see that coming into mental health, maybe therapist verification fakes or other spaces. So it'd be really important to anticipate, like you said, it will be, yeah, I'm just very pleased that this is proactive anticipation or anticipatory ethics and policy. That's really the way forward. So on a related note, Maria Liakata, your colleague, she, in a previous call, she mentioned the research models. How do we keep them available in the research community without inadvertently leaking them to places they shouldn't, which is what you were mentioning as well. And it made me think of, well, for example, it could create vulnerabilities, which could lead to patient re-identification, as you mentioned, if adopted carelessly. But there was another interesting example from the Chen paper where a clinician was working with developmental disorders and using a generative model to capture phenotype diversity in adolescents with a mutation. And they made the weights of the trained generative adversarial network publicly available, and meaning that the model could be used by a third party to synthesize real faces of the adolescents. So a massive potential PHI leak. So to kind of put it back to a broader perspective, we have researchers trying to do excellent responsible work like yourselves. How do you juggle this tension and traction of the idea of wanting to release your models, but doing it carefully? You mentioned like legal frameworks and all these types of things. Is this one of the key priorities of your work?
Yes, of course, definitely. This is one of the key priorities, and the situation that you have described, Becky, they are well known. They are well known in the community, and the release of weights in this way cannot be done, and now there are means to address such problems. And even in my recent work, just to give you example, we have performed careful checks on that, and we have performed special type of training that will restrict this kind of attempts. And of course, what is also very important is the release, controlled release of any models like that. So monitoring of the usage, how the model is used, to whom it's released, whether these the people we are releasing the models to are reliable, they work for research, etc., etc. So there are two main components to prevent such situation. As I said, first, there are AI methodologies that allow us to avoid such situations, and then of course careful monitoring of the usage of the models that we release. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I promise you, we are getting to the positives, and you're doing a good job to reassure me. But one of the main things, elephant in the room, bias. So I know that we could see it in a positive light, but let's just see for now the potential bias, or to exacerbate, discriminate through race or gender or other factors, individuals being left out, or issues around data representativeness and not including voices to be heard. So are there any examples that you've seen where this has happened, or the deployment has led to extreme biases that you could comment on, or just your thoughts around the risks of bias?
Yes, thank you, Becky. That's a very good question. And the first thing I would like to say about that is the bias is the natural consequence of how the AI models are trained. I have already said the synthetic data for me is aggregate of relevant information from real data. That means those models, our models, they rely on statistics. They reflect and exaggerate what is in the real data. And if the real data is biased towards something, let me say in our training data, we have more images than cats than of dogs. So naturally, the model will learn and generalize the statistics to predict more cats than dogs. So this is very natural. And again, this is the responsibility of the researchers to take care of that, to think about the data. What is now is very much established in our community is training on multiple data sets, so that the aggregation will be more accurate. And again, such situations are now so now we have the methodologies to address those situations, and in our research, in particular in mental health research, it's very important. And this is the thing that's also we are working towards, how to actually control the models in a way that they address the biases. So even if the real data contain them and we cannot escape this and we just exaggerate them, we are developing the means that help to address those biases from the natural conditions they arise from.
And we can go into maybe a specific example when we move to the positive opportunities, but yeah, so hold that thought. And then the last example, or elephant in the room, and this is just hypothetical, so I'd be curious to know your views on this, but when I think about bad uses or exploitation of mental health spaces, or profiting or commercialization of mental health, I could almost imagine the creation of synthetic data companies that would sell synthetic data to providers, saying that they'd get a better signal or they'd improve the discovery of trends within their service provision or something like that. So how do we, I just don't know about that, but it just popped into my mind that people are going to be using the synthetic data just to generate, to serve their own means, and that's not always good. So from that perspective of the companies trying to profit off of synthetic data to sell to providers or other spaces. And then I guess on a sort of related note, even, for example, cyber criminals who are profiting from just churning out synthetic data that looks real on the dark web and things like that. So I don't know if we could just expand a little bit about, other risks or other stakeholders or threat agents that might be manipulating the very models that you're trying to protect.
Yeah, I mean, this can, of course, what I would like to mention here is also bias in the research. Again, what I was trying to emphasize here, that primarily what we're working towards are data that should most foremost help the research and promote research, make research easier. And of course, if the model is not trained with for somebody, but if the model is trained by somebody who is not aware of the situation of the bias, or not aware of the proper statistics in their training data, then of course there is a risk that the data that will be generated will be used for research and the conclusions will not be right. I think again, a lot of work has been already done in terms of those aspects, those ethical aspects. And now in all the conferences, when the research where we are publishing our research papers, there are very strict procedures and very strict regulations on the anticipation, on the thoughts that you need to put in your paper, how actually your model will be used. We need to report what has been done to avoid bias. Have we thought about bias? We as reviewers of those papers as well, because I participate in multiple committees for different conferences, AI conferences. So this is not just purely responsibility of the author to take care of those ethical means with respect of the bias, but also the responsibility of the peer review procedure, where we as reviewers, we monitor, we flag potential dangers, we look into this, and I think this is the further way forward. Of course, there could be still situations that potentially we do not anticipate, but I think the more we work towards it, the more we look into it, the better will be the outcomes, the more optimal will be our outcomes.
It's really nice because it's suggesting a culture shift in ethics within data science or computational spaces, which is very much needed. And it's just nice to be reassured that that's happening within the community, that is, as you say, flagging and just responsibly reviewing, that kind of thing. That's definitely the way forward. So I'm going to take a breath, because we're now going to move on to, we're going to demystify some of your research. So we're going to go a bit of a deeper dive. And now this is where I'd really love to hear, all of the possibilities, the exciting opportunities and things. So, but I did promise the viewers that I would occasionally kind of provide a more broader lens, just to kind of zoom in and out. So I just wanted to read a quick example, and this is a positive situation outside of mental health, where synthetic data has been used in a very productive way. So I'll just read this passage out. So the study, which I will share, put links to, demonstrated the capabilities of the AI-driven synthetic medical data generation. They produced images of 3 histological subtypes of renal cell carcinoma by training a generative adversarial network with 10,000 real images of each subtype. And I promise I will paraphrase this at the end. And then compared the performance of the model with another model trained using both real and synthetic data. So that's a nice study design there. So for instance, among renal cell carcinomas, subtype, there's a certain rare subtype that accounts for only 5% of the cases. And by providing synthetic histology images of the renal cell carcinoma as additional training input to a convolutional neural net, a detection accuracy of the subtype was improved. Now, I promise you, I promised I would go up and high, but it's a really nice example where we see one subtype or category that just doesn't have enough representation, images in this case for cancer. And so they showed very systematically using a study design that you can use synthetic data to improve. So I just wanted to just share that example in a non-mental health context, just to reassure people that there's some really great work, as Julia has also touched upon. There's a lot of advances that us outsiders might not be aware of. So on to looking at the benefits, and I'll just kind of very, very quickly list a couple of things that I've noticed, and then we hand it over to you, Julia, to really get into the details. But you mentioned data augmentation, and just it really could enhance reproducibility in research. So in mental health, as you will well know, there's a lack of data sets, and it's really hard to analyze less common outcomes or events or things with not a lot of data. And this is a problem that's called class imbalances, where you just, you really struggle to find that rare disease or the rare data point or something like that. So there was an interesting paper by Belcher, JAMA Network 2019, prediction models for suicide attempts and deaths. It was a systematic review and simulation. So again, I'll put that link there, but it was a positive use for what is in the data science world a rare or more rare or less common event, and how they could use simulations to improve the signal in the data. So I think that's just one quick point. And the second point, that synthetic data could transform interoperability standards and just the sharing of healthcare data. And you mentioned before linking this with differential privacy for protecting the health information from people. So I think that would be a very interesting thing if you wanted to also touch on that. And just the importance of, if you have accurate synthetic data, how it could do the opposite of what we discussed above, and you can increase diversity in data sets and increase the robustness and adaptability of the AI models. So in theory, it could be emulating data of underrepresented conditions or individuals. So it really is, when we discuss the negatives, you could really flip it to a positive. That's why I wanted to tease that apart. And I'll stop there because I just want to hear your thoughts on just the general opportunities, and then we will dive into your work.
Yeah, Becky, that's an excellent, very good point. So I think that's probably evident that synthetic data can really boost research possibilities, because what is happening now is that separate groups work on separate data sets. They build their own models in some restricted conditions. Nor data, no models are usually shared. So this really handicaps the development, the progress with this respect. So we cannot do any aggregated statistics. We cannot work on the transferabilities of the models. And I think that synthetic data is optimal in this case to really help research and promote research. There is also such an important point that I would like to make here, is that synthetic data is also extremely important for teaching and pedagogical purposes. Especially for mental health, when there are a lot of support members that are needed, sometimes urgently on the phone line, and this is very difficult to train those specialists. And here, synthetic text can really enhance and make this process easier, because if we can help people to feel themselves in this situation, they will be feeling in the emergency when they face somebody who is in a mental state crisis, that will really change and improve the situation with such help. Then the third point.
Oh, sorry, Julia, can I just jump in there and say that's a fantastic point. That's such a huge point. And as a tangent slightly, it reminded me of the Trevor Project in America, and they work with LGBTQ plus community, and they created a chatbot, and the chatbot was used to train their support staff before they then went on to work with individuals who were in crisis. So it's a separate example, but it's such a really nice example that is very important. So thank you for that.
Yes, Becky, I agree. I think that is a very actual example. So far I have been also always talking about research, but in spite of what you said, Becky, and in spite of what I said, I think there is also a way of good collaboration between research and industry as well. As I said, research goes very fast forward, and industry usually inherits the most stable methodologies and approaches from research. And I think this inheritance that could be very much facilitated by the use of synthetic data. Again, under the condition that the norms, certain norms are respected, and the industrial partners are trustworthy and established industrial collaborations with already some good experience in the domain. So the second point I would like to comment on that Becky, you also touched upon, is the generation of rare conditions and the missing data, the data sparsity, very important point. And actually, how would I say, a bit later, this is something that our models, the models we build, are also could be used for, is the a generation of the data that simply are too sparse or maybe even non-existent. So this is a modeling. This is again very connected to the problem that the current data that we have are very often collected in very restricted conditions. They could be, for example, collected only for certain layers of populations, only for certain ethnical groups, for example, for different historical reasons. And we simply do not have any other data. And synthetic data is a very efficient way to go forward to project the statistics over other population groups and improve fairness in research in other domains than AI.
Yeah, and so going back to the study design that I was mentioning earlier, the non-mental health example, are you doing research, or is there a plan to do research where you look at real data and then versus synthetic and real data, and just really cross-checking any similarities, differences, and just, is that something that you do currently or would be doing?
Do you mean, Becky, comparing
Yes.
the real data and the fake data with the human experts, whether they can distinguish between?
Oh, no, more having a training set of real data, and then having a training set of real data plus some data augmentation with synthetic data. So just looking at pure real data versus data that's supplemented with synthetic as well, and just looking at what happens statistically comparing those?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
So
yeah,
the paper that we have published in 2020 that did exactly this study,
yeah.
and this is one of the main ways to evaluate the models. That's how we prove the validity of what we generate. Yes, this is absolutely valid example, and this is something that benchmarks the creation of our synthetic data. So for different reasons. And
Great.
primarily for AI models, yes.
That's great. So I'll make sure that, again, that that paper that you just referenced and anything else can be made available. And now thinking broader again, so we're now thinking not just with academic lens here, but how could other sectors or stakeholders use synthetic data for good? So again, hypothetical example, not a real example, but if governments or organizations could use synthetic data to sort of lure or target cyber criminals who are selling fake data. So you could actually create fake data to lure people in. But again, I just wondered if you had any other lens apart from the research lens where others could benefit. You mentioned the training, which is great because that could be rolled out or deployed to charities or other things as well. Was there any other angle that you think could be a real asset to helping keep mental health safe from different stakeholders using synthetic data?
Yes, of course. I think there are multiple layers where it could be used. It's also very important for the whole sociological analysis of the society. I think that there are very interesting parallels that could be made with synthetic and real data. As I said, we can actually fill in the gaps in the existing data with synthetic data and project the differences, see the different evolutions, predict what will be possible, and see and effectively put the missing points into the picture of the data that we have now. So I think it has very broad use on the social level in general.
Okay, thank you. So we can now dive a bit deeper into some of the projects that you're working on, or some of your, I suppose, most fascinating findings or things that have really stuck with you. And just before we do, I just had one question before you start to talk about specifically synthetic text generation. How does that overlap or relate to other free text redaction algorithms? So for people, again, just to broaden this, that when someone's using an app and they're not asked to provide any personal information, but then they say something about the school they go to, or just something that's personally identifiable information. So there are algorithms like PII redaction algorithms that are used to kind of minimize the incidence of accidental exposure or inclusion in the system. But how does what you do differ from these redaction algorithms or overlap?
Yes. Thank you, Becky. Thank you. That's a very nice question. I would like to say that, refer to the point that I mentioned earlier, that mental health text, it's private by its definition. So everything we share, if we share something about our mental health issues, is private. There is no such thing as the separation that those applications you mentioned make. There is no information that could be hidden, some parts of sentences, or some names, some addresses, and the other information it just could not be considered not private. There are indirect references, and even so, for example, by saying the exact name of the person, we directly refer to this person, but then we can also mention where this person worked and what did this person do, or maybe he appeared in some social media, and that's how we can actually identify this person. So there are multiple indirect references. And with respect to mental health text, I think the big thing here is that even if nobody can identify you from this text, whatever you say, whatever you try to express, nobody will just want this overall private information to be shared with anyone. And that's why the approaches that you mentioned, they allow just to change some certain fragments of text that directly identify somebody. And what synthetic text generation does is that we create completely new, completely different text that just sketches some tendencies, some generalized tendencies in certain mental health conditions, for example. So there is no personalized information there, no personalized feeling, no personalized emotion.
Mm-hmm. And so just going back to the second part of my question, what is the sort of the hot topic or the thing that gets you really excited at the moment that you're working on? If you wanted to just, the viewers could just learn a little bit more about, I guess, the cutting edge of the cutting edge.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Becky. So what I really would like to mention here is just the essence a bit, on the essence a bit of language generation. So the whole procedure could be resumed to a model that's a statistical model that will predict every next word depending on the previously seen words, previously seen sequence of words. So this is the general operation. In order for this text to preserve some relevant content that will be needed for research, this process of generation could be guided. And that's what we are working on, the correct means to guide this generation process so that the relevant part, the relevant statistical part for the useful for the research will be respected, but the rest of the text will be not revealing, not breaching any privacy norms. In my paper, the one that I have already mentioned, this content preservation is ensured by keywords, and that's also keywords related to some diagnosis, to certain characteristics of the situation that will inform the model on how to proceed on generation, so the text is relevant. This is very much in the line what we have talked about, the bias. So this is how the model could be controlled to generate the missing information. If we ask the model to generate missing with relevant keywords. So this research is now continued further. There are also other more sophisticated means to control the content. I really think that is a very nice way to go forward, and very encouraging way to go forward. And the second point that I would like to emphasize is particular care that we pay for the privacy aspect. So again, Becky, you mentioned those suppression of certain fragments of text, direct references to privacy addresses, phone numbers. which are very limited. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to remove all of the rare outlier information from the input data, the data that our models are trained on, to reduce some kind of information that could potentially appear in the output and reveal something about the real data. Then we use different means. So this is a combination of privacy preserving techniques. There is also means to train the model in the way so that the data, the real data, is not memorized. And then finally, we are working on paraphrasing techniques, the techniques rewriting the text on the top of the generation model, so that, again, we preserve only the relevant content, but the means of expression, the means of expressing this context will not relate to any private information, private characteristics, whatever private a person could express in what they are saying or what they're writing.
Okay, that is fascinating. That's just like, I didn't even have space to stretch my mind, but you did. You managed to get a little bit more in my brain. I'd love to read more about that when the work comes out. And again, I'll share any of these future thinking projects and stuff you've got on the go. So yeah, that's really interesting when you start playing with the tails of the outliers and things. But so I think we need to wrap up because I've taken a lot of your time, but we'll cover just briefly to end future directions. And you mentioned that the patient and public perspective work. I'd love to know, is that going to be published at some point, or what stage are you at with that work?
I'm very hopeful. We are working currently on the paper, and I guess that will be within in the coming months. We expect to submit it, and then hopefully we will move forward in this process. But yes, we are already having some sketches and some drafts that are being prepared on this work. Yes.
That is fantastic. Okay, so again, I'm gonna just send that my way, and I'd love to check that out. On a, I guess, slightly related note, but not directly to your work, I was reading an ODI newsletter, so the Open Data Institute, and I'm just going to read this part out because I found it fascinating, again, from a public and trust perspective. But so the study participants were asked to distinguish between images of an AI generated or a real face. So, and what they found was the accuracy, it was 48%. Or up to 59, so it boosted a little bit if the people were trained to recognize those that were computer generated. So fine. The study also asked participants to rate how trustworthy they believed the faces to be. And on average, the AI faces were rated 8% more trustworthy, a small but significant difference, according to the researchers behind the study, who've warned about the potential harm these realistic fakes can cause. But it's just a really interesting angle. And I don't know if there's any way you would use that type of study design or ask people. I don't know how it could work, but it just made me very interested to see how people either distinguish or prefer certain images, and I have no idea why. But so I thought I would just ask about that, and then end on, you know, the how do we regulate this space? How do we create frameworks? And just to well, let's start first with the distinguishing between fake and real.
Yes, Becky, I totally agree with you. That's an excellent example for image recognition or image creation. I think we are a bit far from this point with the generation of text. So the text is such a structure that has multiple layers, and the distinction between real and fake could be at a very shallow level and could be at a very deep contextual level of the situation. Mm-hmm. And even if you hear a lot of things about language model generating human-like text, reaching human parity, this could be true for certain situations, though this all should be taken with a large grain of salt. For the main reason, because the contextual, the content parts is not always correctly reflected by the language models, especially in very difficult cases where the accuracy is should be really well respected, like in the mental care domain. The experiments you mentioned, usually in the text generation domain, they are also very often done, and depending on the situation, on the particular model, they could be very different. So it could be a situation where humans really prefer the generated text to real text, depending again on the situation, on the model, on the data set, on the particular condition. And I think that your point with ethical regulations around it is also very important. I think that text generation will progress a lot, and by actually staging such experimentations, the one that you mentioned, we will progress even faster. We need to start to think now about the things, how the situation will be handled. And I think a good way forward is to somehow create an ID or mark for the artificial text, so that even and establish some framework that will regulate the usage and the deployment of those IDs, so that if the synthetic text exists, it will be used and treated as such, having a particular identification that will restrict its usage to conditions where it should be used.
That is incredible. Okay, you've given me so much food for thought. And I suppose just in concluding and a couple of remarks, I'm a co-chair of the IEEE IC program on ethical assurance in data-driven technologies for mental health. So even opening up a space for that conversation and the work that you're doing to bring that in, it could be one opportunity or way to head towards or have an ethical discussion that heads towards standards and regulations. So I'd happily follow that up with you, Maria, and others. And I suppose that my concluding point, and then over to you, is just that a lot remains unclear still about synthetic data in AI systems, and most definitely for mental health being the most precious, in my opinion, data. So a lot is unclear, but there's a lot of opportunity, and we need a lot of people to be involved in the conversation. But over to you, Julia, for last thoughts or remarks before we finish.
Thank you so much, Becky. I fully support you on your message. And what I would like to add, I think, is what we need to invest on is the engagement with the community, with the patients, with people who actually contributes to this data, and that we really need to understand better what will be the best norms of preserving and protecting the usage of the synthetic data, and what will be the best norms of protecting the privacy of the people who contribute to the mental health data that further will be potentially used for the AI models. In spite of all the efforts that we do now, I think communications with people is especially important for anticipating further issues, the one that help us to secure the ethical ground for the further usage of text generation and synthetic data.
That was well said, Julia. You've already got me inspired thinking about community and communication. I work with the music industry and hip hop, so I've got some thoughts, but I'll not drop them here. I will just end with a massive thank you for just speaking so well about a topic that is just extremely just mind-blowing. So yeah, thank you so much for your patience and this taking time to be interviewed.
Thank you so much, Becky. That was very, very, very